Town of Washington Historical Society meeting on September 17, 1998, and we are meeting at St. Joseph's Church in Millbrook, and Father James O'Connor is going to tell us about the history of St. Joseph's Church. And John Morona is going to be showing us photographs, some old photographs he has of activities and of St. Joseph's Church.
I have to talk from here because I can't be heard. John is right, it's not Sunday. It's a busy night for us. I can't promise you to talk long. We have a meeting in the hall and a meeting in the school. But there are an awful lot of things I think to say about the parish. God said something now at the beginning that I think is important. The parishes in Millbrook have always, as far as I know, gotten along well together, and we still do. In fact, today we had our regular clergy meeting for Millbrook. The four parishes get together regularly and talk things over. We met in Federated today. We take turns hosting those meetings. We talk about a whole bunch of things. The Bible school that the four parishes run together. We talked today about the drug problem in the high school, which was reported in the round table a week ago. And we're going to take that up at greater length at our next meeting to see what we can do as parishes. But it is true, I think the parishes in our village, in our town, are a vital part of the whole community. And I thank God for saying that, and I think what he said is true. You are in, for those of you who may not know it, the oldest continuous house of worship in the village. Not the oldest congregation, but the oldest continuous house of worship. The foundation, the cornerstone for this building was put down in 1871, and the building was finished in 1872, and it is basically now what it was then, which means it's in incredible shape, a great tribute to all the people that have passed through it in that time. The front door exteriorly has changed a little bit. We have a picture of the church from 1872, by the way. The front door has changed a little bit. And there's an addition here that we call the sacristy, where the priests used to get vested for services. They don't anymore, they do it in the back. But this part there on the side is an addition. The rest of the building is exteriorly just the way it is as it went up. Now it's wood. That makes it pretty old. It is not the oldest building on the property. The oldest building on the property is the rectory, the house right next door. The history of the Catholic Church in Dutchess County, most of you know. We began with one parish, St. Peter's in Poughkeepsie, with one priest ministering to all the people in the county. We ourselves here are a daughter church to Immaculate Conception in Armenia. It's from there that this church was built as a kind of a chapel for them in 1872. We did not become an independent parish until 1890. So in all those previous years, the priest would live over there and then come here to hold services, say Mass on Sunday, until 1890. Then the parish got its first pastor, Father Burns, who himself is a carpenter. And he is the man who built the parish hall. The hall is the building right there behind the rectory. It's amazing the number of our own people, now many of them are new to the community, of course, who think that was the old church, and then we moved in here. The hall is now 101 years old. As As far as I can figure, the hall was built in 97. Father Byrne left, died 1903. Came in 1890, stayed till 1903, built a great deal of the hall himself. When you go in tonight after our meeting here, look at the ceiling. It's quite awesome. That's his handiwork. All the woodwork in the ceiling in that hall was done by him, which means he was a multifaceted individual. Quite incredible. When the chapel from Amelia, this building, became a parish, and Father Byrne came here as its first pastor, the property all to my right here, which is the property to the south of this building, was part of the blacksmith's property. What is now the rectory was the blacksmith's house, and it stood back where the hall was. They moved it forward to become the rectory. They took down the old shed that was there. They moved the house forward, and then Father Byrne built the hall. The house, I haven't been able to find a date for it. Conrad might know. But the house is probably 130 years old. It's a great age. It creaks when you live in it. It's typical of an old house. It's been worked over, of course, many times. Electricity had to be put in at one point, and of course, heating. The ceilings on the second floor are extremely low. The second floor is where I live. About a half a foot above my head, I'd be touching the ceiling. The ceilings on the bottom floor and on the top are normal height, but for some reason, that second floor is a very low ceiling. We've had, since Father Byrne, including me, 10 pastors, so we've had 11 pastors all told since 1890. 3 of them almost make up for 60 years of that. Father Weir, Monsignor Caldwell, and Monsignor McGuire. They were here, all of them, over 20 years. Father Weir, 33 years. He was the first priest after Father Byrne. That kind of tenure, and as I was going through all this to talk to you tonight, I thought, because many times I've wondered, what gives the parish the incredible stability it has? I noticed it when I first came here 5 years ago. The parish is incredibly stable. It's a community where the so-called old-timers know each other well, and many of them born here and grew up here. The others have been all welcomed in and congealed to form one very, very affable community. And I think part of it has to do with the fact of the stability of the pastors. Because in one way or another, a pastor gives a certain amount of tone to a place. When you have one man basically ministering to a congregation for over 30 years, which means he's touching 3 generations in one way or another, it shapes people incredibly. And it's also very unusual. That would not be true for most of the Catholic churches in the Archdiocese of New York. You would not have that kind of length of tenure in one place. So I think that's noteworthy about the parish, that there's a tremendous stability in the pastors who have served here. That's not been true of the assistants, the associate priests. We may have had more than most parishes in the Archdiocese. We had one pastor who positively disliked it here. And the parishioners of all know that. Monsignor Loftus, who was here for a year, positively disliked it. I did not know that at the time. I grew up, when I was in high school, Father Loftus then was the priest to whom I went to confession every week. He was assigned as an associate priest in Briarcliff Manor. And I grew up in Asking, and Asking in those days was very much a town like Millbrook. But when he came to Millbrook, and I didn't find out that until after I came here, he couldn't bear it. The country at that point was driving him wild. He just couldn't take being out of a bigger city experience. He lasted 1 year. So out of the 11, in a sense, he doesn't really calculate into the statistics. There's really been 10 that have been 5 years and more. The building we are in at the moment inside has changed substantially once, and in a minor way one other time. The second longest pastor, Monsignor Caldwell, who was here from 1942 to the late 50s, actually early 60s, is the man responsible for redoing the altar the way you see it now to differentiate it from that picture that went around. The picture that you saw there going around is the original altar. It was typical of many Catholic churches built, say, from 1850 through 1925. My own parish growing up, St. Augustine's in Asking, the altar would have looked almost exactly like that. For those of you who have been to Rome to see the Victor Emmanuel monument, the Italians call it the birthday cake building, and that's what it looks like, a large birthday or a wedding cake. The old altars looked very much like that. They were built against the back. They were some kind of, they weren't marble, most of them. The altar, the table itself would have been marble. The rest of it would have been some kind of stucco, normally rising above the altar, fairly far up, very elaborate, and we would think nowadays very ugly. At least some of us would think very ugly. I thought my own growing up at home was very ugly until they changed it in 1960. That altar that was here from 1872 was changed in 1945 to what we have now. All this woodwork was put in during Monsignor Caldwell's pastorate in 1945. It wasn't exactly like it is now, of course. The altar was back there against the wall, because the priest would normally offer masses facing the wall and only really turn to the people when he was reading the gospel and giving a sermon for the homily at Mass. So all the activity went on for him, went on with his back to the congregation. There were at the time when Monsignor Caldwell did it, 2 other wooden altars on each side of this one over there in that alcove, and one over here. On those altars were the 2 statues that you see here now, which I am proud to have rescued from our school, because at the last renovation, these 2 statues, which belong to the whole pattern of this woodwork, these 2 statues of Mary and Joseph, were exiled up to the school and were gathering dust in the school when I became pastor, so we brought them back down. The minor renovation was done by Father Reynolds. All the altar was left intact, but during his pastorate, the foundations of the building were completely supported anew. Downstairs, major work was done in supporting the floors, restructuring there, all the invisible stuff that keeps a building held up. The present painting and colors were done by him. The 2 altars were removed, and the baptistry, which is new, part of the 1945 renovation, and the stand on which the tabernacle is new. The tabernacle, which tonight is empty, for those of you who are not Catholics, you realize that for us, the center of prayer in the church is the tabernacle. We believe that's where the sacrament of Christ's body and blood is kept during the week for personal prayer. I've taken the Blessed Sacrament tonight to the chapel in the rectory because I knew we were going to be talking here, and just for the sake of respect, and also since not everyone shares our belief in what the Eucharist is, I didn't want to offend anyone. But the tabernacle that sits on the stand over there was here in the middle of the altar. Behind us you can actually see where it was taken out. It's not, we didn't do a perfect matching job. Right there in the center it was taken off and then put on a stand over here on this side. It's only been moved in the past couple of years to that side. The reason for the moving was in the renovations when Father Reynolds was pastor. He added a bathroom, which I think every church has nowadays. But the traffic to and from the bathroom by children, for all of you know what it's like. I mean, it's constant on a Sunday morning. So I just thought as respect, we just shifted things around. But those are the only major changes. So there was one in 45, and then one during the time that Father Reynolds was pastor, probably in the mid-80s. I think, John, you would know better. I don't know the exact date when everything was shut down and painted. Somewhere towards the end of the 80s, anyway. Before that painting, there were, along the walls of the church here, under the windows, various emblems, much like we have here to the right and left of the altar now. You can see up there in the, as you face it, the right-hand corner. Does anyone know what it is? The phoenix, exactly. It's if you've ever seen the Austrian coat of arms, the coat of arms of the state of Austria, it's the phoenix. The phoenix is the mythical bird which arises from its own ashes. St. Clement of Rome, in a letter that he wrote from Rome to Corinth in the year probably 79, perhaps as late as 96, but no later. St. Clement mentions the phoenix as a symbol of the resurrection of Christ. In other words, the fact that Christ, having died, rises from the tomb, just as the phoenix, having been extinguished, rises from its own ashes. So the phoenix becomes, therefore, very early on, already in the 2nd century, in the 1st century, a symbol of the resurrection of Christ. Over here, of course, the image is directly from the book of the Apocalypse, the Lamb standing as if he were slain, the Lamb that St. John sees in his vision. Again, a symbol of the resurrection of Christ. They're the two of the many that were here, and the only two that remain are both symbols of the resurrection, which of course for us is significant. John said we're here and it's on a Sunday. We celebrate Sunday because it's the day of Christ's resurrection. And so the two symbols that have been left in the church are symbols of the resurrection itself. Around the altar, and if you've never done it before, please come up afterwards and look at the woodwork. In the little images on each of the panels as you go along are signs of Christ's passion. You will see the nails, the scourge, the crown of thorns, the stick on which they put the hyssop for the Lord to drink. All of those form the images on the panels around the altar. The coat of arms over the altar, over the doorway there, is the coat of arms of Cardinal Spellman, who was the Archbishop of New York when this remodeling was done. here, the coat of arms is the coat of arms of Pius XII, who was the Pope and Bishop of Rome at the time that the altar was remodeled. Apart from Mary and Joseph, there are two statues on either side of the altar. The one behind me is Christ himself. The other one, and I don't know why, is St. Dominic. Dominic lived in the 13th century, the 1200s. He's the founder of the Order of Dominicans, the Order of Preachers. He was a great preacher. Many of our own people think it's St. Anthony because he's a very popular Catholic saint, but it's St. Dominic. Now, when it was done, Monsignor Colville may have already had the intention of inviting the Dominican sisters to teach in the school that he planned to build, which is what he did. And so when the school was first built there up on the hill, it was staffed by nuns from the Order of Preachers of St. Dominic. So maybe, having thought of that, he was foresighted enough ahead to put their patron there on the statue there on the other side of the altar. Around, in the center, of course, is the crucifix. On either side, John the Evangelist and the Virgin Mary. And around him, the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are basically over behind the tabernacle. There's a rather modernistic statue of Mary, a very, very traditional statue of St. Joseph. He looks like a very old man. He's been noticed on the way in as the newest addition to the church. It was a gift, just a year old now. The statue, the marble statue of St. Joseph, outside the church, was built in Carrara, Italy, and shipped from Italy last year, and put in place out there now where it is. It's a very young St. Joseph. Joseph the worker, the carpenter. It weighs 1,000 pounds. No insignificant thing. It took a crane to lift it. The base for it was a gift of another parishioner, Skipsiferi. That base had been given to him and had lain in his yard for 30 years because once on it stood a statue of the Virgin Mary in front of Lourdes High School in Poughkeepsie. And when they changed the statue in Poughkeepsie, they took down the base. What it is, of course, is just about that thick a layer of marble panels, as well as the marble top, around a foundation of cement. It's solid cement going right into the ground, the marble then put around it. The cement, of course, it was fascinating to watch it all being poured, shaped, and all the rest. It was no easy job. So the base of that statue came to us ultimately from Lourdes High School, so it has its own history, a long time behind it. An older, more traditional statue of St. Joseph is there in the alcove, and here, on this end of the alcove, is a statue of a young man with a dog licking a wound in his leg, and he's holding a loaf of bread. That's a statue of Saint Roch, French saint who died in Italy, who is one of the patron saints of the little village of Fondi, F-O-N-D-I, where more than half of the ancestors of our congregation came from. About 60% of our congregation is Italian. More than half of the Italians in Millbrook can trace their origin back to that one little village, Fondi. It's about halfway down the coast between Rome and Naples. God willing, Father John and myself and 48 of the rest of us in the parish will be there in 2 weeks. We're going, well, I don't know how good it is. I'm terrified of airplanes. The whole parish knows that. And I have to do 2 long flights for 10 days. We're going for 10 days. Some of them may actually promised last year when I was sent over that I would take a kind of a tour group back. We're doing it, and we will spend a day in Fondi, where I visited. It's funny. We've had in a parish that basically ethnically was Italian for a very long time. We never had an Italian pastor. I think I'm the first one to have ever visited Fondi, and probably the first one to speak fluent Italian. It took a long time. The rest of the parish ethnically is extremely mixed. I didn't think of it, but I'll tell you a story. We have no, because of the shortage of priests in New York, we no longer have a regular American assigned here as an associate to the pastor. And since I've come, we have had priests from India with me almost every year since I've been here. Father John is the fourth one. All the others have had to go back. We had last year, for the whole of the summer, a priest from Ghana who said the night before he left, he was sitting with Father Alphonse and myself at supper, he paid a great compliment to the parish, and I think indirectly to the whole of Limburg. He said at the supper table, he had worked, because he was in Ghana, he had worked with two white priests after he was first ordained, Dutch. And he said that after the second time he swore that he would never work with another white man. He said that it was just impossible. He said, but I needed money for my parish. And so when I had asked a friend of his here if he could find a priest for the summer, the friend wrote to him, and he said, I came here because I needed the money. They're very blunt. And he said, I couldn't believe that Americans were like you people. He said, I think this parish is colorblind. And he said, the whole village seems to me to be that way. We have many, not many, but more than a few interracial marriages, black and white, Asian American. I have Asian American in my own family. Indian Irish, so Hispanics. So there's quite a mixture. And I myself, I grew up in a village where the priests in the two parishes, there were two Catholic parishes in the village, where the priests never spoke to each other. One was the Irish parish, and the other was the Italian parish, and they didn't talk. And I think many people took it for granted. I always look back and thank God for, among many other reasons, for my mother, who was Irish from Ireland, but couldn't stand the Irish priest, so she always went to the Italian parish. Her order of importance was the Pope and Father Tommaso. The other crowd, she sent us to school with the other crowd, but she would not go there. And then you come to a parish where we are wonderfully Catholic, small city as well as large city. Wonderfully integrated, and it makes a big difference. And I think it's also true of our community. And it must form part of the history of our community. It would be a sociological study to wonder why so many of our people, I don't think it's all, I'm not naive and I believe in original sin. I don't think that all of Limburg is unprejudiced. There are different kinds of prejudices and run in various different directions, but I think the vast bulk of the people in our community are wonderfully open people, amazingly open. Cemetery is a history of the village in miniature, I think. It's like going through 9 partners. Anyone interested in history should study the tombstones. We have people in our cemetery, as you do in 9 partners, who were children when George Washington was still president of this country. That's amazing when you think of it. Here in the parish, we buried last year a woman who came here 3 years after the first pastor died. Mary Valentry, who was our trustee when she died at 102 years of age, which means she just summarized in her whole life the history of the parish. She was like a living example. And she couldn't remember, she was old, she was sharp, but she couldn't remember, as none of us could remember all the things going along. Mary could never remember when the hall went up. She had no recollection when she was a child of how long it had already been there. But she remembered an amazing number of things and an incredible number of people. But we're changing, and that's going to be the end of my history. All of you are aware of that. Millbrook is changing quite quickly. It's growing. We have many, many people moving in. You can see it most obviously in Burbank because the waves of immigrants from Westchester and Putnam have now moved up. First to Hopewell Junction and they're now moving into Burbank. We have them already coming into the village. I watched even in the time I've been here, the newcomers, the incomers if you want, who are new to Millbrook, who are in the school. So it's opening up to a whole different experience, and at the same time I think they're finding the stability and the rootedness that goes with being a community like we are. They're finding it here and adjusting to it and welcoming it. And that's a wonderful thing. Charlotte Rotuno, who's been also here a long time, Charlotte's into her 90s, Charlotte said to me, Father, you have to build a new church. She said this to me a month ago. I said, what? She said, yes, she said, in 10 years it's not going to be anywhere big enough to house what's coming. Now, I know her well enough to know that she's a very sharp lady, and that may be true. But it would be heartbreaking to think that this building would have to go the way of all flesh just to be made bigger to house 1,000 more people. We should preferably build another Catholic church somewhere else in the village and keep this one as long as the Lord lets it stand as it is. Think how many people in each one of the churches in this village have sat there, prayed there, been baptized as Christians, been married, buried their families, been buried themselves, their whole life in a sense, touching upon one building. If the building could tell the history, it would tell a different history than we're capable of writing. If it could tell a little bit about all the people that have prayed here, cried here, gone through agonies here at times. The agony of being an immigrant. If you were Italian in the beginning and couldn't speak the language, and this was your only tie to what you were familiar with in Italy. All the heartbreak that goes with separated families and pain. A building like the church endures and sees tremendous amounts of history. This one has. That's what makes the present generation rich, because in some way, it's all passed down to us. I don't know what happens. I could never explain it. But I was a teacher for 24 years. Every class has a personality. Any of you who were teachers knows that, and each class has a different personality. You can have classes where you have each individual being a nice individual, but the overall personality of the class is rotten. They're impossible to teach. They're trouble. They're just a pain. You can have other classes where all the individuals are a pain in the neck, but the overall personality of the class is wonderful. Every one of our parishes, like every single village and community, has its own collective personality that's wider than simply the sum of all the individuals that make it up. Its history, its life, its ancestors, the whole complexus comes together to make the collective personality. That's part of our history. And the fact that all of you study it is a great thing. Thank you very much.
Will you be able to say 30 minutes?
Maybe 30 more. 90. I hope to. And I told the Knights of Columbus. Our Knights of Columbus was founded here in the parish 100 years ago. This January was coming January. And they've just been rejuvenated. So the council is now active again. It's a great thing. But I told them the other night, trying to make a joke, because they all know that I'm afraid of airplanes. And every time I get on one, I think it's going to go down. And so I said the other night at the beginning of the meeting, I said, if I'm still your pastor at the end of October, this is what I'm going to do. And a total look of consternation. They thought the cardinal had already told me I was going to move. So the joke fell flat. Yes, I'd like to be the longest, but I'd like to have this opportunity. Are there any questions on the building itself? Well, in the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, the emphasis was twofold, on the Mass as it was being offered and on the presence of Christ. And so, because the altars are moved forward, the priest would have to be saying his Mass always with his back to the tabernacle. That's why I've kept the tabernacle on the side. I don't want to say Mass with my back to the Lord. The stained glass windows are original, as far as I know. They went up with the building, each of them different. The head of Jesus and the head of Mary. The rest of them are all abstract. The crown in this one for Christ the King. The one here is the pillar of the scourging of Christ in his passion. The one down there, the third window, or fourth window down, may be the most interesting. If you go to St. Patrick's Cathedral, on the main altar, which is all marble, all decorated marble, in the middle of it is not the phoenix, but the pelican, a symbol of the pelican. And the old belief was that the pelican, when it had young, its chicks, would pick its own breast and feed the chicks with its own blood. And so in the Middle Ages, the pelican became a symbol for Jesus, who saved us by the shedding of his own blood. And therefore, in the floor of St. Patrick's is a gigantic mosaic of the pelican. That's the fourth window down there too, the image of the pelican. Almost all the others, the book, of course, the scriptures, the others are symbols of the sufferings of Christ. No, thank you. know, I thought of it today. There's an article in the paper. The statue of the Virgin Mary down at the church, the Catholic Church of Carmel, was pushed over. Big statue across St. Joseph. That's that statue. So it's moving up. But no thanks be to God. With the head trouble.
Father, could you translate the Latin inscription up there, please?
Yes. O crux ave spesulica comes from, it's a variation of the hymn of Venantius Fortunatus, 5th century, and it means, O crux, O cross, ave, hail, spes, O unica, only. Hail, O cross, our only hope. The cross is our salvation.
Thank you.
Father, I heard that, and I'm not sure if this is true, that the original rectory was just 2 floors and that they put the mansard roof on in addition.
I've heard that too, but I haven't been able to substantiate it. There's no record of that.
Because I thought if that was true, then maybe that's why the 3rd floor is proper height and the 2nd floor is lower.
But the 1st floor is regular height.
Yeah.
I don't know. The flooring on the top is just like the flooring in the rest of the building. It's all old-fashioned inlaid wood. The 2nd floor is all carpet. But Father Joe Henning, who was here for a long time with Father Reynolds, stripped off the carpeting from the 1st floor and the top floor, and the floors are very lovely. It's only the floor I live on that is not so much. It has all that carpeting still. I'm not sure, Ellen, because the roof is a Yankee roof. You know, the Yankee roof with those special, it's not like the roof in the church or the roof in the hall. It's elevated. There are gutters that flow on different levels of elevation. It's not flat across, it's ridged in parts, which is a very old-fashioned roof. Now, it may have been done when the house was moved frontwards, but there's no record of that. I think it's German. I suspect, again, there's no record. We know when it was done. We know the pastor who did it. I think it's from Oberheimer down in Germany, where most of the good wood carving came up until the late 1960s. Even in Italy or in Spain, where they have great wood carving, you don't find things like it in Southern Europe.
Well, I just wanted to mention too, when we go into the hall, part of the, not the original altar rail, but the altar rail that went with this restoration is in there on the stage.
In the old days, if you look at the pictures, in all Catholic churches there was a rail that would run across in front of the altar. In the restoration in the 1980s, the altar rail was taken away, most of it thrown away. But in the hall had been a junkyard, collapsing until about 2 years ago. But when we began the restoration of the hall, we found part of the old altar rail, and that's there. You'll recognize the wood, the carpet, immediately. It's very beautiful. If you couldn't get it now for hundreds of thousands, it just would be impossible to get that kind of carpet. And leave you, I must run up to the school to say hello to all those parents. Enjoy your class.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Mom. I was going to announce it, and I forgot to announce it. We do have another trip that's off-site. It's an option.